So likewise, when you say khud plus a together, it makes it khuda. What is the outcome? Khud se aane wala. Someone who's come on his own. We may not necessarily have any objections here. The point is just a little bit further down the line. You have some people who say that the world has come into being on its own. No one created the entire arena. No one created the entire world, entire universe. The world came into on its own because of a big bang. So there are some people who attribute, the world, that the world has actually come into being on its own. There is no creator to this world. So that's where they are actually taking you. That's why. And also because Khuda is not the name that Allah Azza wa Jal has attributed or Allah Azza wa Jal has named himself with. Therefore, we are not going to call Khuda. Although we may be able to allow people to explain that Khuda is actually, you know what? It is Allah's, it is Allah. It is the one that created the universe. It is the one that created you. In order to help them understand, you might want to use those, those terminologies such as Khuda or God or something that Sheikh mentioned. But you cannot call Allah Azza wa Jal because Allah Azza wa Jal says, فَادْعُوهُ biha. And further, Allah Azza wa Jal says, وَذَرُوا الَّذِينَ يُلْحِدُونَ فِي أَسْمَائِهِ. This is one of the ways of ilhad, turning away from the command of Allah Azza wa Jal and not being mindful of what Allah Azza wa Jal is telling us. Therefore, we got to be careful. So this is why we said that Allah Azza wa Jal's name is, or Allah Azza wa Jal's names are absolutely tawqifi. We do not have anything to do with the names and attributes of Allah Azza wa Jal. We cannot call Allah Azza wa Jal the names that Allah Azza wa Jal has not given himself, which is why Allah Azza wa Jal, we talked about it, which is why Allah Azza wa Jal said in the Quran, وَلَا تَقْفُ مَا لَيْسَ لَكَ بِهِ عِلْمٍ. Do not ponder, do not think about, do not entertain ideas about something that you have no knowledge of. So, since we have no knowledge of Allah Azza wa Jal, and the roots and the sources of the knowledge of Allah Azza wa Jal are the Quran and the Sunnah, we would only go back to those. We are not going to give our mind any kind of trouble that we help people understand by including, by giving or assigning some new names to Allah Azza wa Jal. So that's something very important. And another thing that we did in the previous session is that each name of Allah Azza wa Jal is absolutely not only unique, but each name has an attribute. While people there are in this world who may be called Khalid and Javed and Muhammad or Ahmad, they may not necessarily have any traits or attributes pertaining to the name that they have. However, every single name of Allah Azza wa Jal is absolutely meaningful. And every single name of Allah Azza wa Jal has got attributes. Yeah. And some names may have more than one attribute. It is the Jahamiyyah, a group, a firqa dalla, a deviant group that says that we do not really want to give any attributes to the names of Allah Azza wa Jal, because if you assign, if you give any attribute, if you acknowledge that Allah Azza wa Jal has also got those attributes, for instance, if we call Allah Azza wa Jal Al-Basir, then we are saying that Allah Azza wa Jal sees. And when you say Allah Azza wa Jal sees, Allah Azza wa Jal must have eyes. And when you say Allah Azza wa Jal has eyes, then you must actually say Allah Azza wa Jal's eyes are pretty much like ours. Therefore, you are comparing Allah Azza wa Jal with a human being. Similarly, when you say Allah Azza wa Jal is a Samir, Allah Azza wa Jal hears. Yeah. So you are saying that Allah Azza wa Jal has got, indirectly you are saying Allah Azza wa Jal has got ears. And therefore, you are making a comparison between the attribute of Allah Azza wa Jal, or between Allah Azza wa Jal and his slaves. Therefore, when you compare like that, you are actually associating partners with Allah Azza wa Jal. That's why we never ever give any attribute to Allah Azza wa Jal, is what Jahmiyyah says. And of course, this group is given this name Jahmiyyah because of this gentleman called Jahm ibn Safwan, who once moved away from the theology, the ideology of the Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and that's why they got this name. So this is what Jahmiyyah is. Another thing that the Jahmiyyah do is, look, if you call Allah Azza wa Jal as-Sami', similarly, if you call Allah Azza wa Jal al-Basir, if you call Allah Azza wa Jal al-Hakim, al-Aziz, al-Qawi, al-Hayy, and if you keep calling, so many names to Allah Azza wa Jal, then the Jahmiyyah say, are you trying to say that there are so many gods, there are so many Allahs? So they feel that if you call Allah Azza wa Jal with several different names, they feel that you're calling several different entities who you consider worthy of worship. That's why they say, no, if you call Allah Azza wa Jalla as a Samir, you might be calling another Lord or another, so to say, God. Yeah, this is where you can use it. So, and if you call Allah Azza wa Jalla al-Basir, you're calling someone else. If you say Allah Azza wa Jalla is al-Hakim, you're calling. So you are actually associating partners with Allah Azza wa Jalla. You're worshipping so many different, entities. You're worshipping so many different deities. So this is wrong, which is why we actually say, the Jamia say, this is not the stand of Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. This is what the Jahmiyyah say. That's why they say, this is why we do not want to give any attribute to the names of Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah Azza wa Jal indeed has names, but He has got no attributes like that. So this is what they say. So this is where the problems actually can creep in when we start believing in such philosophy and when we have no knowledge of the true teachings of the religion of Islam. So this is very, very significant.